I come from a total media background. I'm a recovering journalist. At one point in my career, I was promoted from being an editor to being a bureaucrat and became an executive. But that's just one approach and one angle of a multi-pronged attack on misinformation and restoration of truth. So we have some very creative innovators here who are part of the fight. Kevin, tell us about you.
I'm from the University of Ottawa. I actually live in New York City and work at a tech firm in New York City, so I come at the question of media and truth from two different angles. One is a very technical angle involving AI and the role of AI, and the other one is from a societal view. This is the work that I do at the University of Ottawa, of solving societal problems, solving problems at the societal level. And so the interest that I have when I look at an overall map of what is causing, what are the factors that lead to political polarization, there are two sectors on that map where I'm looking for bright spots that I can promote, that I can bring to the front, that I can support, that are doing positive work in that area. There are other areas as well, but the two areas, where that are of interest to me have to do with the media and the bias in media, and the other one is what I would call the outrage industrial complex. So the actors who are making money, becoming famous because they are promoting polarization. So in these two areas, I wonder who is working in this area that I can help, that will help reduce both of these, reduce bias, reduce the ability really in this wild west of media these days to make money and become famous by causing polarization. And this is my interest in media.
Great. Kevin, I hope you'll tell us about some of those companies that are working in those two areas. Dan?
I'm Dan Granger, founder and CEO of Oxford Road. We're an ad agency that focuses on audio. We got our start in 2013, very early in the podcast movement, and really was attracted to the intimacy of the format, the trust that moved from a host to the listener, because that was a vehicle for delivering advertising in a way that you couldn't really achieve elsewhere. And it was a really cool innovation for audio. So we moved into that space. And have had a very successful run. Today we're the leading independently owned agency that focuses on audio. And one of the things that happened, I'll just give a little bit of context for how we go from that to here. A couple of years ago, just like the rest of us, the world changed very quickly. And it's interesting that we're in Austin right now, which is ground zero for Joe Rogan and a lot of the controversy and debate that's been happening in the last few months around him. He's a great picture of what our industry has been grappling with. How do you decide to platform or not to platform? How do you decide to sponsor or not to sponsor? Where is the line between freedom of speech and recklessness? We started feeling a lot of pressure in 2020 to help advertisers. First, they were scared because of all the changes that were happening in the marketplace. So we actually launched our own podcast to say, okay, how can we help marketers navigate the new landscape that's constantly shifting around us? And so we started with that intent, and then a couple months later, George Floyd happened. And the dynamic in the landscape shifted and the conversation shifted, and suddenly brands didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go. And all I knew was that on one side of the house I was feeling a lot of pressure from the marketplace on the publisher side to say, hey, to each his own, let us communicate. And we have relationships with these people that go back decades. But on the other side of the house, we're representing these brands that are saying, we don't want to be aligned with misinformation. We don't want to be aligned with hate speech. We're going to stay away from certain genres. There are advertisers that will not support news. They will not support journalism, good journalism, because of guilt by association. They throw the baby out with the bathwater. This wasn't a good solution either. So we changed our podcast to focus on something we called the Media Roundtable. We started listening to voices all across the media ecosystem. People on the left, people on the right, household name journalists covering everything across the spectrum, and trying to understand what is our part in this? How are we responsible for the division and the polarization that we're seeing? And what we concluded was that with no oversight and with no ability to see what is inside of a show, why does it exist, and what are some of the attributes, everybody's flying blind, and nobody's got time to listen to hours and hours of hundreds or thousands of podcasts to vet them. And so we were looking for a tool, we were looking for a solution that could give people more informed choices. In 1906, Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, which he set out to write to expose the hardships that immigrants were facing coming to this country and trying to make their way in the world. He wanted to expose that, and he did. But inadvertently, what we today call the Food and Drug Administration was born out of that, because he exposed the toxic ingredients and the bad habits and bad practices that were going on in the food industry. And that's why we have nutrition labels on food. That's why consumer packaged goods have to disclose what's inside of them. What we concluded was media needs an objective third-party representation of its contents so that people don't have to decide to platform or not to platform, but they can be more educated about what they consume, what they sponsor, what they distribute. And we believe that what is measured improves, and that by giving people more information, more access to information, we will see better results in the marketplace. And downstream from that, when you move the carrot and you stop incentivizing the outrage and the misinformation, and you incentivize quality journalism and intellectually honest discussion, we believe that that's going to help with polarization and make us all a little bit happier, a little bit less conflicted. So now how we do that is with a solution that we are introducing called Barometer. And I didn't create Barometer, Tamara did. And so I will yield to Tamara to talk about the how we are solving this problem.
Thank you so much, Dan and Eric and Kevin, for being here and for introducing this solution. Just a quick caveat, Tamara did not build Barometer by herself. Tamara's awesome team, who's on the live stream and in person, has been instrumental to us creating Barometer, and also Dan and Dan's team. When we started Barometer, we were focused on providing nutrition labels, starting with news. And eventually we kind of realized that there was a more opportunity to provide this content labeling for other types of content. And what makes podcasts really challenging and unique as a medium is that they're dense, they're long, and they're conversational. So you can kind of throw away everything that you think about when you're trying to analyze a news story, and it's really a very different beast to try to figure out what's inside of the podcast. And so, being a student of the design method, we went and we started talking to folks who were actively trying to pick which podcast to advertise on. And they would tell us things like, oh yeah, we just listened to a couple of episodes, and then we're like, oh yeah, all right. Like, we have somebody listen to a couple of episodes and then try to make a judgment call. Well, coming from our background of technology and scale, we realized that this probably wasn't the most consistent way to go. People have their own biases, so if you're trusting an individual to listen to something and try to make a judgment about it, you never really know what's going to happen. And then there was a lot of thought leadership in the space, including different organizations that had put out brand safety guidelines, including the GARM framework. So if you're not familiar with the GARM framework, we'll send the links out after, but it's a global association, advertising, thank you, Global Advertising for Responsible Media, and they basically created what's called the Brand Safety and Suitability Floor, which is a list of 11 components that could be risky in content. Everything from obscenity and profanity to adult content to what they call debated sensitive social issues, which is that messy political content that people are kind of shying away from. And The reason why it is messy is because it's very nuanced and there's a lot to dig into. It's very different when you're presenting something in the context of like a true, honest journalism versus when you're talking about something and people are interpreting it as the news, but really it's just somebody's opinion. And so that's kind of what we set out to do, was to make a consistent way to apply the GARM framework's criteria to score podcast content. And so that's what we did. We created an AI that analyzes each transcript and looks for the presence of and then the quality of the presentation of each of these components that the GARM framework presented. And then we thought, well, maybe we could do better than just calling people out for the things that they were doing poorly. Maybe we could also incentivize people to actually be contributing more positively to this crisis. And so the Media Roundtable has forwarded several values that they hope to see in the future of the industry. Things like tolerance, clarity, truth. And so we also seek to reward people who are upholding those values and forwarding those values through their content. And so that's the whole goal of Barometer, to be able to score any podcast episode and all of the podcast episodes at scale using AI, and to provide these consistent nutrition labels that advertisers, networks, and agencies can all count on to be a shared source of information that can allow them all to make more informed decisions.
All right, thanks, Tamara. Dan, Kevin, I have a question here. First of all, listening to you talk, I feel like it makes my case about charity. The positive virtues that emerge from the Media Roundtable podcast, those all sound good to me, and I think very few people would disagree with them. But I also am aware, as I've seen the media brands, the media institutions that I grew up with decline in popularity and trust. And in their place is what emerged was the outrage industrial complex. Kevin identified, I love that phrase. Which has a couple elements. One is it appeals to people's emotions and fears. Two, it seems to be centered around charismatic figures. Think about Rush Limbaugh and Tucker Carlson, and on the other side, Rachel Maddow. You can identify the people who are part of that emotion-driven news media in a way that you can't identify as, a regular reporter, perhaps, on the masthead of the Post or the Times. So what we have are this kind of battle between our better angels, to Lincoln, and our kind of inbred, all too human lizard brain that wants to be frightened and stimulated and feel part of a tribe, and that has been very effective at changing the media landscape. Is there, between these two kind of warring impulses, where do you think the future lies? Kevin, since you came up with the phrase, I'll ask you.
So I think the system, the approach that Dan and Tamara, Oxford Road, and Barometer have come up with is affecting the incentives of the industry. And I think that is a way to make a change that is also organic, that also gets to the heart of the fact that the incentives as they are right now are part of the problem, or the lack of incentives leaves you with an incentive system that brings you this outrage industrial complex.
So let me just unpack that. The incentives right now are to amass a huge audience and then sell that audience's attention to advertisers. Advertisers either don't care or don't have the tools to separate themselves from outrage content.
And that's basically the lack of the tools. So if we had some tools so that brands can say, okay, this is my preference, we have certain values, and we would like those values represented in the advertisements that we make. And there's a tool that will take care of placing the advertisements accordingly, then I think that will make a dent. I think that will make a change in the incentive system that will make a dent in the problem.
Dan, Tamara, you said in our discussions beforehand that one of the outcomes of the nutrition labels on podcasts is that some podcasts will not clear the hurdles, and that that means that some advertisers won't be able to reach the bulk audience that they might want. That seems like a perverse incentive for some advertisers. How do you square that circle? In the end, there are some advertisers who don't necessarily care. All they want are eyeballs, and there is money left on the table. How do you square that circle? Dan, I'll put the question to you first.
So if I understand the question, as we've been on this path, I've already had some distance introduced into some long-standing relationships in the industry from some creators and some publishers that, this wasn't really a thing. We're all just kind of transacting, not really judging the content, but just doing business. As our agency has tried to help our clients be a little more mindful of what they're supporting, and as we have tried to recruit efforts like what we're doing here, we've had some people kind of walk away from the conversation or relationship. That's okay, because I think what we're doing in good faith. It is really important in this initiative that we check ourselves on our own political bias, and that we check ourselves on our ownership bias and who we are incentivizing. When I see groups that only attack one side, that's a problem for me. That's probably going to do more harm than good. When we see publishers that, maybe with good intentions, are trying to say, we're going to do brand safety, trust us while we grade our own paper, that's problematic. Okay, so what we're doing, I feel like, is in good faith. I feel like we're investing a lot, we're willing to take some risks, and we're going to step on some toes, and that's okay. We're not trying to hurt them, we're trying to be fair. I believe very strongly in the free exchange of ideas and how critical that is for our democracy. I don't want to silence voices, I want debate. But it should be fair, and if you're going to publish content that's going to harm people and just going to make us less and less healthy as individuals and as a society, then you should be exposed for that. And it's not my job to say you can't access it. We're Americans. We don't want to be told what to do. We don't want to be told what we can and cannot listen to. But I do think that people would like to be informed about what it is that they're supporting and consuming. People need information, and then we can trust them to use their freedoms in a good enough way.
Great, and yeah, you understood the question. Tamara, could I ask a question about the existing safeguards, not so much in podcasts, because there really aren't any, but in digital advertising, so ads.text or sellers.json. And those are attempts to, at scale, allow brands to identify sources and make sure that there's brand safety. How are they working, and what would you, for Barometer, what have you learned from the success or failure of those protocols?
One thing that we've been seeing is that the state of the art right now is like keywords based. So people will have like a block list of keywords, and they might say like, oh, anything that mentions, like this was a big one, was like shots. Like anything that mentions shots is bad. Well, what if you're ESPN and people are making shots into the basketball hoop? Like being able to detect the nuance of context, that's kind of a trivial example because it's kind of obvious what the context is. But in other cases, it's not just the words or even the topic. It's really the context of the way in which that topic is presented that can make it either like something that you do or don't want to support. And so there's kind of different ways of speaking about how something can be presented. And why we really liked GARM was that they presented a couple of these options. So they make the distinction between content that's glamorizing or content that's dramatizing or content that's informative. And for us, that was a really key distinction because at the moment you could only just say, this word is there. But now we can say this topic is being discussed in this way. But the challenge is you need to do a lot more work to understand a topic than just being able to recognize its presence in an ad or in a news article. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the biggest hurdle.
Good. All right, thanks. That's a really interesting distinction between glamorizing, dramatizing, and informing.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand a little bit more the distinction between glamorizing and dramatizing?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're talking about like glamorizing versus dramatizing, let me give you a couple of examples. So one thing that we kind of came upon early on was trying to interpret how this true crime content can be understood. And so content that basically discusses murder and very heavy and awful, disturbing crimes, harmful acts against society in like really lighthearted and inappropriate ways, where you could go from speaking about a murder to laughing within one sentence. And like our computational linguist, who will be here shortly, he coined our kind of rally call around this issue, which is murder is not entertainment. And if it is, we should be able to detect that, and we should be able to understand when it's presented in a glamorizing way. So when people are jeering on a murder, when they're laughing about something that happened, when people died, versus dramatizing. So the difference there would be like, say some crime just happened and there was a news story that came out about it, and it was like a feature piece about that crime. It wouldn't have that same kind of laughing, positive quality, but it might still be dramatic. It might still be kind of heightening the emotions that you're going to have when you're reading that or when you're listening to that. And then the final kind of piece is the informative. So the informative content is always a challenge because people don't click on it. People click on content that's stimulating, that makes them react emotionally. And so that's really the challenge, is there is informative content. Usually it takes a little bit longer to verify before it gets published. Usually people don't really react to it unless they search it out on their own. And so one of our goals was to be able to make it easier for people to be able to parse between the ways in which such content is represented, and that glamorizing, dramatizing, informational kind of hierarchy is a really interesting one.
Great, thank you. So it's a way of capturing tone that you can't capture in a transcript or something like that. The ecosystem of sort of anti-misinformation crusaders is full of AI companies that are using AI to fact check and fact facts. Obviously, the platforms.
Estimated sensitive social issues, because they can't define that. They just chalk it all up to hate speech. They literally just remove that category. They don't provide enough nuance for you to be able to actually understand what's in the content. And also, they only really care about content that affects America because we're the only place where it's even being considered for regulation. So there's all of these countries whose democracies are basically taken for a spin when Facebook decides that they're going to be not critical of or not have any way of moderating the content and the exchanges and even the sponsored content that gets there. So we took this to heart, and what we did first was we stuck to those GARM definitions and we extended them into audio. So the GARM framework was originally designed to inform how to do brand safety for display ads. They have like words that relate to how things are visualized. And so the first step for us was taking that into audio and then actually creating examples of each of the levels of risk. So what does it sound like when something is glamorizing for debated sensitive social issues, or glamorizing obscenity and profanity, or glamorizing adult content, versus dramatizing, versus educational? And after doing that exercise, that required a lot of kind of manual work. And I bring up the true crime episode because that was our first kind of intuition about the space, was what can we do to understand what makes this content so like icky, for lack of a better word? And we created this kind of two-step process, and we had to validate both of these steps. The first step is finding a kind of a trusted and concise and comprehensive list of topics and issues. So for obscenity and profanity, for example, a list of all of the bad words, and then being able to understand like which word is more bad, which words are acceptable by the FCC, which words are not acceptable, all of that work. And then the next step was to really understand how to interpret the tone. So how do we know if it's glamorizing, dramatizing, or educational? We do what's called a tonal analysis. And so actually from the transcript, we're able to understand the emotions that are in the content, and we're able to provide like a fingerprint of those emotions, and that's how we are able to score the low, medium, and high risk. But the challenge is, we had to create our own data sets from podcast content, and so it was up to us to make sure that we were being critical of our own approach, of the content that we were ingesting, and of the outputs. And so we created this strategy of a beta launch. So this is a beta launch, this isn't a public launch, for different reasons. The first reason is we're still building out more and more episodes that we're analyzing so that we can feel really confident that we're presenting these shows in an accurate way that's informed by all of their historical content. The other reason is that we have kind of a gut check. So there's a human in the loop element to where we have a community of stakeholders from all of the sides of the industry who are able to help us validate that these outputs are actually meaningful and are actually consistent with their own policies and the things that they have been doing. So the final piece is we're taking an initiative, and this has already been happening. We're working with diverse, smaller networks that are highlighting voices of people of color. And the key here is that we want to make sure that we have diverse content in our data set from the beginning, because that'll allow us to make sure that we're not being biased against like one voice or another. And this has always been a really core value for Barometer. When we do sentiment analysis, we're very careful, and we do a lot of edge cases to know that, like, if you say that something is dark or ominous, that's very different from saying that somebody's skin is dark. But there's still too many sentiment analysis models that would say that if your skin is dark, then that's a negative sentence. So those are kinds of that's the level of nuance that we have to build in from the inception to make sure that the future outputs of this technology can be trusted.
Kevin, did that answer your questions, or is there something from your experience that you would advise Barometer to pay attention to, or do you think are keys to avoiding inadvertent bias in AI?
One other question that I might have related to this is what happens when my rating, let's say I'm a podcast, it doesn't jive with what I understand, and I want to talk with a human, I want to see what model are you using, why was I rated it this way? How do you answer that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a many-part answer. The first part is transparency. You have to be upfront, and we are upfront about the process for which you can contest basically a rating. However, we want to be very clear that we're not looking for people to say, oh, I don't think you rated me very well, I would like you to re-rate it. Like, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to address legitimate errors that might have happened in the scoring. For example, the transcripts that we use when we score the content, they're generated by AIs that are listening to content and then transcribing them. What if there's a transcription error and a word is misrepresented, and then our analysis built on top of that uses that incorrect word? There is a process for recourse for when that happens. And it's rather simple. It's a pretty objective process. You can have multiple humans listen to that soundbite and acknowledge, oh yes, that was the incorrect word. However, when it comes to kind of cherry picking, oh, I don't think this is the score that I want, or I think I want a different score, we're not really open to that. But let me explain how we do deal with, like, if there is an issue in terms of the calibration of the system. So when we first started, we were very, I would say, conservative in our scoring, because we would say, oh, if you had even one bad word of any kind, that would already flag the model. After doing more research, speaking with the community, and learning about like FCC guidelines and what's actually allowed to be said on things like TV and other mediums that are regulated, we were able to calibrate our list of the bad words and exclude the words that are considered acceptable. And so this resulted in a globally less conservative score for the entire category, but it wasn't a one-off he said, she said thing. All of that being said, we have to acknowledge that in some cases, it's not going to be a transcript error, it's not going to be an error of the, it's not going to be an error that's that simple. And so there is a process, and it's a human, it's like a high court, you can think of a process of people who are ethicists, trusted people in the community on a rotating basis, who are able to come together if it's really needed. And so the idea is that we should be able to resolve all of the conflicts before it escalates to this level, but from the get-go, we are equipped with a body that is trusted and capable of making a decision if one is escalated to that level of dispute.
All right. Let us wrap it up here, but let me just make a comment. I remember that when I was a young journalist at Money Magazine, there was a big debate about whether prices would rise for commodities because we were running out of everything from zinc to oil, and there was a bet between two prominent economists about whether prices would be higher in 10 years because of the depletion of all these resources. One said that prices would have to be higher, the others would say they would actually probably fall because human ingenuity would find a way to solve those looming scarcity problems. The economists who bet on human nature and human ingenuity won big time. Kevin, in your model of how we're going to solve the problem of polarization, it relies a lot on the inputs from a lot of creative, small, entrepreneurial actors who together will find a solution that everybody wants. Barometer and Oxford Road, I would say, are perfect examples of that kind of human impulse to find a solution to a looming problem that everyone agrees is a problem, where there is the confluence of doing the right thing and responding to a market opportunity. That's where I would place my bet. So, Dan, Tamara, Kevin, thank you. And see, reason to be optimistic. Am I right?